there. Welcome back to the story mode. I know it's been a long time since I made a video, about 2 months actually, and yeah, I wanted to post something up here a lot less formal than usual. I usually have a lot of these pre-edited videos. Don't worry, I'll be getting back to that a little bit soon here. I've been pretty busy, so I haven't posted anything on this channel in a while, but as you can see, today is going to be a tier list video. So I went and saw Black Widow last night, and I was thinking a lot about the MCU and been watching Loki and all that. So I wanted to do an MCU tier list. So I've never done one of these on this channel, or really ever, or at least for anybody to watch. Specifically, I've mainly stuck to doing my own in my head tier lists. So this will be interesting. Uh, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe right now. Subscribe to the story mode. We'll be giving it's a pop culture channel. We do a lot of interesting stuff. I'll be doing a lot more tier lists. I'll be doing I've got a lot of creative videos coming up that I've been thinking about a lot that I really would like to do. So hit the subscribe for a bunch of just anything I feel like making really at the time. I will do more of those like in-depth videos about video games specifically that I did in the past about The Last of Us Part 2 if you've watched that. If you haven't checked that out, it's a good video. I think it really conveys what I think about that game, which I know it's kind of a year old and it's very controversial, but it's what I feel about that game. And I also gave a pretty in-depth overview of how to read Star Wars canon novels, which, as you can see on this side, I have quite a few of, and I've always really enjoyed reading. So check that out. Those are the two videos up right now, and then this is the third video. You're getting a tier list, an MCU tier list. So I really am excited to do this and kind of share my opinions on these films. As you can see, I am a Marvel comics fan. I have always been, and I appreciate what the MCU has been able to do, bringing to life a lot of these characters and a lot of these stories that we don't really get to see too often. So let's begin. So let me talk about real quick with what these tiers on the side are going to be. Obviously, I've done a pretty standard S through D, but I threw in an A minus in there because I'm not someone who likes to box a lot of these things into very specific, like good, bad, not good type categories, So here I love to do whenever I do these, by myself or or for other people, I like to do top five. So the top one is top five. So that is like an actual kind of list. That's genuinely what my top five MCU films are currently. Everything else, so the A tier will be other films that I think are really great, but might not crack the top five. They're films that not only are, and I'm not grading this specifically on what it does for the MCU. I'm kind of grading it on how good of a movie it is, or how important it has been for the film industry or the film history, as the MCU really becomes like the biggest franchise we've ever had, and it's catching James Bond, and now soon we'll probably pass it. I think by the end of this year with the number of films that are out for the MCU. So we'll be talking about top five, then the excellent tier. So that's A. Those are the movies that I think are really great, but just missed the top five. So there'll probably only be a couple in that. And then A minus are still great movies, still great MCU movies, but not quite, close to top five level. And then we have the good ones. It's the ones that are entertaining, that don't do anything to wow you, might have a couple great scenes, but overall just kind of a solid MCU movie. And then the C tier is kind of the forgettable ones. It's the ones that you go, I didn't really enjoy that, or that was kind of disappointing, but it's serviceable. And if you do a rewatch of all the films, then you're kind of like, you're ready to get past those, but they don't feel completely unnecessary or skippable. And then D is the below average ones. And I think most of the time the MCU only has a very few amount of below average films, and they, especially since post like 2013, they've made consistently great movies. So I don't think we're gonna have too many in that tier. Spoiler alert. But the MCU has been genuinely really good, and that's why we're talking about it still. It's because they're still going, they're still strong. This list also has all the TV shows that have come out. So WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and Loki. Loki is not done yet. There's one more episode, but I think unless that episode's really, really bad, I kind of know where to rank it. So it might, I think it would only go up a tier if that last episode is great. If not, and it's awful, then it might drop it down a little bit. But so far, the first 5 episodes have been so good that I believe Loki will probably stay wherever I have it ranked right now. But let's get right into, I guess we'll start at the top with Ant-Man. So Ant-Man, I think is really underrated. It's a really entertaining movie. It's one that nobody really talks about anymore because it did come out under the shadow of both right after Avengers Age of Ultron and right before Civil War. So it was a very small movie, no pun intended, that came out between two gigantic billion-dollar movies. And so people, I think, forget about how solid of a heist film it is, and just it's very funny. There's a lot of really good jokes. The Baskin Robbins jokes is one of my favorite. Luis is killer with that van and everything in the first act. There's a lot of really great moments. I am gonna put it in B. It's really good. It borders on A minus, but yeah, it still is. Even though I think it is underrated, it's still just a solid movie. It rarely gets to the great level, and the third act is different, but it's still a standard Marvel third act. And I think third acts ruin a lot of these films, and I'll probably be talking about that a bit more later. Ant-Man and the Wasp. So Ant-Man and the Wasp, kind of same thing, came out right after Infinity War and was one of two movies to come out before Endgame. A lot of people forget about it. I think this is a significant step down from Ant-Man, putting it in C. It is a meh movie. It's other than its end credit scene, which connects right to Infinity War and then later Endgame. It is kind of just a movie that feels like it's there to keep the Ant-Man franchise going. It doesn't have huge stakes, and it doesn't really have any emotional moments that really like suck you in. And I really enjoy the Ant-Man character. I think he's fun, and the Wasp is also fun. And that cast of characters, I'm excited to see the third one, but it just doesn't stand out in any real way. There's not a moment that I truly remember or think is really, really great, and so I'd have to put it at C. So Avengers Age of Ultron. This is a tough one because I know a lot of people. I kind of don't want to. I'm going to rank Avengers 1 first because you know what? I'm switching gears. I'm switching gears completely. We're going to start by going just all the way to the beginning. Let's go to Iron Man. And let's do these in order of release. I think these are in alphabetical order. I didn't make this list. I'll put the link to it in the description. But Iron Man 1. So Iron Man 1 kickstarted this whole thing. It's a genuinely really, really good movie. And even though I think by today's standards, it might seem, the story concept at least might seem a little dated because almost every Marvel origin story has copied it. And it is pretty standard for origin story fare. Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. is so good. He's so perfectly cast. The direction is really solid. Jon Favreau kills it. And it's just a really, really great movie. I'm borderline excellent, but I think I'm just going to slide it into great. I know a lot of people might be saying that's way too low and they might have an A or S. But I think, yeah, it hasn't aged perfectly just because it is the prototypical origin story for Marvel, especially. We've seen it so many times now, but it is still really, really, really great. And I think, I mean, obviously, we wouldn't have the MCU without it. So it deserves its plaudits, but it's aged a little poorly, but not as poorly as some of these other ones that we'll talk about. I'm not talking about in terms of effects and stuff like that. All of it still holds up. It looks great. Its humor's great. Everything about it is genuinely great. And it's right now it's the highest ranked movie I have listed here. So it has a really a strong case to be up there. But I reserve the right to change some of these if I start filling up some of these other tiers and feel like maybe I want to bump it up to excellent because it really is right on the border there. But let's go with the next one, Incredible Hulk. So this is the first one I'm going to put in D. I change my mind on Incredible Hulk pretty much every single time I watch it. And I think that's a testament to how average and forgettable this movie is. And at times below average. I think not just surely the fact that Edward Norton was replaced by Mark Ruffalo, but it's also the fact that this movie its main pull into the MCU has been Thunderbolt Ross, and that with the Shang-Chi trailer that just came out, we have Abomination coming back, but they've never really truly brought anything back or continued the story in the slightest. And I think it's just, yeah, it's forgettable. And then sometimes I watch it and go, okay, some of these action sequences are redeeming for the film. It'll bring it back to a little bit higher, but it never gets below meh for me. And the last time I watched it, I thought it was significantly worse than I remembered. So unfortunately, I've got to put it in D. And I know some people really like to defend that film, but for me, it's easily my least favorite of the Marvel movies. At least I binge watched all of them before Infinity War in 2018. I've seen every one of these movies at least 3 times, but that's the last time I watched Incredible Hulk, and I really didn't stick with me. It didn't hold up as well as I thought it would. Thor, no, Iron Man 2 is next. Iron Man 2 is another one. I know I like this movie a little bit more than some people, but I'm gonna put it in D still. It's a movie that's kind of monotonous and doesn't go where much or doesn't go very far. It continually pushes the Avengers exposition. It gives you all of that with Agent Coulson and Tony Stark under house arrest. It does a decent job of doing the demon in a bottle storyline, but it's kind of skips it over and doesn't we don't get too much with it. It was cool to see War Machine, and I remember back when that film came out and I saw it in theaters, it was amazing seeing all those Iron Man suits fighting, and Whiplash is kind of a forgettable villain, but yeah, especially as we've added more and more movies every year and we get more and more sequels every year, Iron Man 2 becomes increasingly forgettable and a lot more like the flaws are very, very apparent in this film. So I've got to put it at D. Now we get to Thor. And Thor, I think, is pretty underrated, honestly. Loki is a fantastic villain in this movie. He's one of the best Marvel villains ever, and that's why we're getting a show. But also, he's just really solid in this film. And yes, the Earth stuff does get a little bit repetitive. Some of the humor is not that on point. I don't love that Thor is depowered most of the film, but as that story, that's a story from the comics that we finally get to see unfold, and we get to see him become who he is. And I think the climax, as well as the beginning of the film, when they go to, what's it called? Where the frost giants live, Niflheim, I think it is Niflheim. No, Jotunheim. When they go to Jotunheim and they fight the frost giants, those are some awesome action sequences. I love that this is the most Shakespearean Thor we got, which is still the Thor we're getting in the comics. That's the way Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created him, was to be a lot more Shakespearean, and this is the most we got with that with Kenneth Branagh's direction. I thought it was really solid. The middle obviously does weigh it down. It's a little slow, a little tedious. As I said, the jokes don't really land that much, and comparatively to a lot of other Marvel films that have come out, it's not that strong. But for an origin movie, it is definitely, I think, pretty underrated. So B tier is kind of becoming the tier of underrated Marvel films. And that brings me to another one. I believe Captain America, the First Avenger, is a really solid movie. I know people dislike the montage stuff through most of his time being Captain America. We don't get to see a true progression of him from the Star Spangled Man with a Plan to Captain America Soldier, but everything we did get to see is really, really good. I like Tommy Lee Jones a lot. He's a forgotten element of this movie. Sebastian Stan is great as Bucky, and it really sets it up in kind of a heartbreaking way when we get to see him as the Winter Soldier again. I think it's a really fun movie. It's my second favorite origin movie in Phase 1 after Iron Man. It sets up the character so well, and I just love the way they did it as a period piece. It works really well, and Hugo Weaving is really good as the Red Skull, and I hope we get to see more in Red Skull, because we got I forgot the guy from The Walking Dead who looks like Topher Grace. Yeah, he's Red Skull in Infinity War, and I want to see a lot more Red Skull in the future, because that was a really great villain, and it's one of my favorites from the books as well. So that all built to the culmination, which was the Avengers. Now, the Avengers has had its detractors over the years, as most popular movies do, because people start to say, well, it's not as good as everybody remembers it. Well, I'm one of those people who says we got to put ourselves back in 2012 and look at the Avengers as it was when it came out. We had never seen anything like it, and that's why it's S tier. It's not the best Marvel movie. It's probably not even my top 3 or 4 Marvel movies, but it still is in that top 5 for me from what it did for the MCU and what it did for superhero films and film in general. I mean, it changed the industry to where now everybody wants a universe that interconnects. And you could say that's for the worst, but it's worked so well with Marvel. And I pray it works one day with DC, because DC is those are some of my favorite characters in fiction. But Avengers set the standard, and it's such a fun movie. It's really entertaining. It's a great summer blockbuster. Joss Whedon, for what you think of him, he directs it with a really good pace and a really lighthearted fun, but also he's able to unite these characters and give each character their own moments on screen. And we had never really seen something like that. When we had all these movies where they had 3 or 4 villains and they could not pull them off. Spider-Man 3, X-Men The Last Stand, so many movies like that just couldn't pull off multiple villains. And yet, how are we going to do something with 5 main heroes, 5 main characters? And they did it, at 6 actually. So they did it, and they did it so well. It still works. I really, really enjoy this movie. And if you put yourself back, if you're one of those people that saw in 2012, don't second guess yourself about how good it is. Yeah, maybe it's not as great as you remember when you rewatch it, but it set the standard. It set the standard. It's so good. And it might feel really small by Marvel standards today, but this was like the biggest thing when it came out. And I've got to put it in my top 5. It's genuinely fantastic. Okay, so now we get to, I think it was Iron Man 3 was next. Iron Man 3. So one of the more controversial Marvel movies, because the Mandarin twist ending, and I'll be honest, I really don't like that. I think the third act completely betrays this movie. This movie was really, really strong. In fact, the first hour to hour and 20 minutes of this movie, I thought was my favorite Marvel movie I'd ever seen at the time when I was watching it. The Mandarin twist completely throws the thing off the rails, makes it a little bit too Marvel jokey for my taste. And then the third act is just a little bombastic and kind of betrays the darker tone that this had initially set up, where it was more of a PTSD drama with Iron Man and Tony Stark. Post Avengers, with the Mandarin as being this kind of unstoppable hidden force that he was going to have to take on. And that just kind of all evaporates with that twist. And not only does that evaporate, but we just get this crazy, big, flashy Marvel ending, and it doesn't go with the themes that are set up in the first 2/3 of this film. So for those reasons, I'm putting it in the C tier, the meh. It is the first third to 2/3 is really, really strong, and that's what saves it for me. And every time I rewatch it, I kind of go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I don't like this movie as much as I did, or as I do. But as you get to the end, you start to remember why so many people are against this movie. So I think they can redeem the Mandarin character in Shang-Chi, but we'll see how that touches on Iron Man 3. I think they should kind of just forget about Iron Man 3 and leave it alone. But 2013 was probably the worst year for the MCU, because we also got Thor Dark World, which I think Thor Dark World isn't as bad as many people say. It's still a solid swashbuckling kind of medieval adventure. But that being said, it is super forgettable. The villain, obviously, people have talked about it a million times. He's super forgettable. And reading Jason Aaron's Thor run, Malekith is really entertaining and so different than how he's portrayed in this movie. And this movie was kind of in a bit of development hell. At a lot of creators change hands and filmmakers leave, and it was one of the messier Marvel movies that they've ever made. That being said, it's still a decent story, but not nearly what it could have been, and like the epic stakes that it should have are not there. But so the Thor Dark World I put in meh. I think it's better than a lot of people remember it, but still definitely not the best. And that led up to one of the best Marvel movies, Captain America Winter Soldier. I know a lot of people are going to be upset about this, but I'm going to put it in A and not in S. I think it's a really, really great spy thriller, really strong movie that has a really interesting tone and a really interesting pace that the Russos actually carry over to Civil War. And I think a lot of people forget how well they use it in Civil War with in that Captain America and Bucky Barnes style that they created for this film. But in this, it's much more of a spy thriller. I think the only movie that's come close now, having seen it, is Black Widow in terms of creating that feel, that Jason Bourne feel. It does such a good job, and the way Alexander Pierce is a super underrated villain, by the way. Robert Redford's villain. He The way it is about Captain America having to change his ideals and become more of a symbol of what America should be versus how he sees it actually becoming with all these secret government agencies and whatnot. And it's a strong movie, strong story, and does have a good third act. Even if it gets a bit bombastic, it does have a good third act, and I think that's what keeps it up there. And by the way, Avengers is one of my favorite third acts in all of Marvel, so I think that's one of the reasons why it's so high up there as well. Let's go on to the next one, Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, that being said, Guardians of the Galaxy is a movie that has so many Marvel tropes now. Yes, it does. And it has a lot of things that, as I've been talking about as negatives for some films, it has them. And yet, a lot of times they're positives for Guardians of the Galaxy. It's in my top five. It's, I think, the funniest Marvel movie they've ever made. The jokes land. James Gunn's sense of humor is really, really funny. I love the chemistry of the characters. Seeing it for the first time, it's kind of like the Avengers. We had never seen anything like it, and now we're very used to that James Gunn style humor in the MCU. But those characters were so unique, and as a comic reader and somebody who, even though I enjoy Marvel comics, had never really gotten into Guardians of the Galaxy ever in my life, and so it felt fresh and it felt new, and this universe felt like it was like a Marvel version of Star Wars, and it just seemed so well rounded, and like we were creating something within this universe that could stand on its own and where anything was really possible. And they didn't have to specifically follow how, certain characters would behave. They could take the Guardians as they did and just do whatever they want with them because they didn't really have fans. So I think that made Guardians of the Galaxy really special. And I remember seeing on Facebook, I think Marvel posted, because they were trying to raise awareness for this film. They were trying to get people to go to IMAX and watch it. And I went and saw it in IMAX the first 17 minutes of the movie, I think, and I was blown away how funny it was. And I was like, you got to see this. And the chemistry between the leads is unmatched, and I can't wait for the third one because Guardians of the Galaxy is so good. And I think that's another one that probably gets more hate as time goes on because we got to start to see a lot more things like it, and obviously Suicide Squad's coming out, and Guardians 2 and stuff like that. But Guardians of the Galaxy at first, when it first came out, it was a legitimate science fiction comedy, and we hadn't really seen anything that funny in the MCU before. So I am putting it in my top five, and I don't really care what people say if they don't want it there. That's too bad. Sorry. So next was Avengers Age of Ultron. So this is another one I like more than a lot of people do. That being said, it's still only B. Definitely a step down. And I think it's mainly because for me, there was a lot of potential there. I really liked what they did with Ultron, and James Spader does a good job. But then ultimately, it just kind of spirals into something where he wants to. It's like the symbolism and the messages that he wants to create are still there, but they're overshadowed by just more bombastic action and more characters that are trying to be introduced. And it has the Iron Man 2 problem of trying to introduce so many things that ultimately Marvel kind of changes. Like they try to start the Ragnarok stuff, but Marvel does that, but then does it in a different tone. So those scenes don't work as much anymore. I also heard this one had quite a bit of production problems with cast and crew and Joss Whedon and all of that. So, but anyway, it's a decent movie. It borders on great a lot of times, but then a lot of times it drops down to at least sometimes below average. So I'm going to put it in B because I do enjoy watching it, but it's definitely the worst of the 4 Avengers movies. So after that, we got Ant-Man. So I already put that one on here. And then we got Civil War. And I know this is a really unpopular opinion, but Civil War is my all-time favorite Marvel movie. I think it's fantastic. It's everything the Winter Soldier was, with that tone, that spy thriller tone, that political thriller tone, and you combine that with as if the superheroes were real, like social commentary about how they would be treated in politics and seen by the public. And you combine that with a really touching story about friendship versus like how Iron Man, his parents are murdered, and we get to see how that affects his life, but then also how it challenges his friendship with Captain America, who's best friend since he was a child and only person he can connect with now that he's 90 something years old. Bucky, you know, and Bucky being under mind control and the tragic nature of that and how he doesn't get to choose what he wants to do, and we have to, we see Iron Man and we see Tony just lose it at the end, and their fight is heartbreaking, but also it has other incredible action sequences. Black Panther's introduction was amazing. It's one of my favorite character introductions in the MCU thus far. I think the film just works so well. I maybe I'll make a whole video about why Civil War is the best Marvel movie. I know there are probably no people out there saying that, but I think it works on every level, both as a character film and as Avengers 2.5. I think a lot of people don't give it credit for being a character film first and foremost. Like Captain America and Bucky Barnes and Tony Stark drive this movie. They absolutely drive this movie. And if you don't, you can look at the big airport fight, and yeah, that's a really great moment, and it's one of the reasons it's up here. And you can look at some of the early Wanda and Vision stuff, and you can look at Black Panther's introduction, and you can look at Black Widow, and especially how now Civil War plays into her film. I'm not going to spoil anything with that film, but how Civil War leads up to it, and it's such an important movie for not still what we're dealing with in the MCU, but also it just works. It works so well as our two big leads. We get to see them develop actual identifiable differences. Where in the comics sometimes seemed out of character for the two of them to take sides. And this, it really felt like it was genuinely a part of their character the entire series. It felt like it was leading to this. And I really love that movie. It's my number one Marvel movie. I'll say that right now. I don't think I'm going to say what order everything else is in, but I'll tell you Civil War is easily my number one Marvel movie. So after that, then we got Doctor Strange, which I think is kind of a step down from Civil War. Well, a significant step down, and mainly for me because it falls into the Marvel origin story syndrome, where it just follows such a standard formula. It's such a basic movie, but it's the visuals and the world that they built that raise it above the meh tier for me. Like its story is meh, but everything else combines to make something that's pretty good. And Benedict Cumberbatch nails the character, and I like to see his progression and how well it's adapted from the books. And he feels really real and cool, and I'm so excited to see what else they do with this character in the future of the MCU. But I think for the most part, the story is really, really just standard. So it's one that I don't really look forward to rewatching in terms of gaining new insight from the story, but it's so visually impressive and so visually unique that I think it definitely deserves to be at least B. And I know quite a few people have that higher than B, and I can understand that as well. But for me, it just kind of rides that line. I think the next one was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which to me is also B. I think at times it jumps up into the A minus A range. It has a lot more heart than the Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one. The humor's a bit more over the top, and some of the jokes don't land as much, or it feels more so like they're trying to make jokes than they are trying to create real characters with real types of quips and things they would actually say. Some of them just get a little bit too ridiculous, but I do like Ego. He's a good villain. I think the film gets a little bombastic in some places, but that being said, it has a lot of heart, and it mixes its heart well with the music and everything else that James Gunn brings to this world that he's kind of created for Marvel. And I think it's a really solid movie. Definitely a B tier. I think B tier is kind of racking up because that's what Marvel falls back on their standard formula a lot, which is not a bad thing because I've yet to see one that I've said is really truly terrible. Right? There's no awful movies they made. They've made some that are disappointing, like Hulk and Iron Man 2, but they've never made any that are just truly like, wow, I can't believe they made that. I've got to leave the theater because it's so bad. They know what they're doing, and if they follow their standard formula, you'll still go to the theater and watch something and think it's a good time. But yet, they somehow find a way in some of the movies that are very important to the overall narrative of the universe, they still find a way to make those really, really powerful. And I think that's a really strong credit to them. So we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and another one that just misses out on my top 5. And I have read so much Spider-Man leading up to Spider-Man Homecoming. I was so excited for this movie, and I went back and dove back into the original Stan Lee, Steve Ditko stuff, and just for 4 or 5 months leading up to Spider-Man, was getting so hyped for Homecoming. I absolutely love the way Tom Holland portrays Spider-Man, and Vulture is a really, really strong villain. It has a great third act. It has Spider-Man failing multiple times and rising up, and we get to see that. I love that image of him looking in the water, like it's from "If This Be My Destiny," that story, that 3-issue story in the original Stan Lee, Steve Ditko run. Oh my God, it's so good. I really love Homecoming and what they are able to do with not only humor, but a lot of the how Spider-Man is able to cope with things through quips and jokes, and that's always been his character in every incarnation of him. But he fails a lot and he gets beat up a lot and he has to rise and he has to be like he's one of the genuine superheroes. Like with Superman and Batman, he's one of those guys who just never goes down, never gives up, and gets the crap beat out of him a lot. And we get to see really all those sides of Spider-Man in this. And I really, really love this movie. I love the way Tony Stark is included in this and how he is kind of the replacement for Uncle Ben. And I was sad not to get Uncle Ben because I know a lot of people are tired of that, but it is such a strong part of who Spider-Man is in the Spider-Man franchise. But I think Tony works really well as a replacement to that, and we get to see that evolution of their relationship, and it makes it even more tragic when Tony dies in Endgame. So next, so that was 2017. Yeah, we got Thor Ragnarok, which I'm gonna put in the great tier. For me, it's one of those movies that, like Guardians of the Galaxy, I think it's the second funniest movie probably in Marvel, in my opinion. It has amazing jokes. I love Taika Waititi. I love his sense of humor. Loved it ever since I first saw What We Do in the Shadows back in, when did that come out? 2015. It's so good. He's hilarious. He makes that movie work on like a incredible science fiction fantasy level as well as a comedy level. What they did with Hulk, the way they kind of touch on Planet Hulk, but then also go into the Ragnarok storyline with Thor. I think the Ragnarok part was one of the parts I was most disappointed in, just because it had that traditional Marvel thing of just like, we are going to show you something that's tragic and make you experience this moment. And then after, we're going to throw in a joke so you're not that sad when you leave the theater. I think that's my biggest problem with Thor Ragnarok, and that's what keeps it from being an A or even a top 5 for me. But I think with Thor Ragnarok, they've set the Thor franchise in a completely new direction, which made Thor a lot more likable, a lot more fun. I would like him to blend this with the Shakespearean stuff a little bit more. But if we only get this type of Thor moving forward, that it is kind of fine with me, because I've enjoyed these movies and I enjoy the colors and the craziness and the atmosphere. And I'm very much so looking forward to Love and Thunder. And I can't wait for that to come out next year. I'm sure it's going to be bonkers. What is next? So that came out in 2017. So 2018, we got Black Panther. Black Panther, this is a tough one. It borders on, it's between good and great. I think I'm going to drop in great for now. Yeah, because Black Panther, the first, it's another one of those movies that the first like 80% of it is really awesome. And I love the opening. I love the way they were able to build this world within the world. As I said, with Guardians of the Galaxy, that was kind of something that I really enjoyed what James Gunn did. Felt like Ryan Coogler and the whole team on Black Panther built this really fascinating world with so many colors and amazing technology. And it was like the science fiction, really science fiction-y world that exists in the more grounded superhero world of Marvel, and how Marvel comics have always been. More grounded world, take place in New York and major cities that we know. This was the true like superheroes sci-fi Earth movie that we could get. And The characters are fantastic. I love some of the spy missions they kind of go on. It has that spy thriller feel in parts, but then it also is much more about family and place in the universe, and what it means to be a king, and what it means to lead people, and what it means to, be able to use your power for good, and to extend your power to not just protect those with you, but protect others. And it has strong messages, and the villain also is really great. But the third act definitely falls into your typical Marvel fight, the constant fight, big CGI fight, and it loses a bit of its power with its message, because we kind of ignore that for a while. And so, as I've said with many other Marvel movies, it replaces message with action. And I think that's what drops it down a little bit for me. And that's why it's kind of on the border between great and good. But since I have so many other movies in good, I'm feeling a little more generous. I'll bump it up to great, but it is kind of right in between that. It's like a B plus. It's not quite an A minus, but it's not a B. But I'll round up. Another movie, or well, so right after that we got Avengers Infinity War, and I know some people who are film critics thought this movie was a little bit too bombastic, a bit too much. But I every time I watch this movie, I genuinely love it. I've got to put it in S tier. It's in my top five. I think it's probably number five of those five movies, because it's not as cohesive as a part one. We don't get the full payoff of the finale, but Thanos is an amazing villain. He's a great character, honestly, to lead us through this film. He has the most screen time out of any character in this movie. Where you get really strong character moments with all the characters, like every single Avenger, every person who's been in these movies ever has a good moment in this movie. Not just a cool moment, but some touching moments. We have good moments between Thor and Rocket. We have good moments with Wanda and Vision. We have good moments with Iron Man, and good moments with Captain America. All of this stuff combined, Doctor Strange, the opening with Spider-Man, the deaths of all these characters at the end when they get snapped. It's so memorable. It has such amazing moments. I have a hard time not putting it in the top five, just purely for the ability to rewatch it, as well as the ability to just it's one of the standard pieces and firm support pillars of this entire universe now. And so we're kind of building everything in phase four, and then beyond, at least for the next probably 3 or 4 years, we'll build off of what happens in Infinity War and Endgame. So that's going in top five. So right after that, in 2019, our next film was no, our next film in 2018 was Ant-Man and the Wasp, but I already talked about that. So in 2019, March 2019, we got Captain Marvel, and Captain Marvel's another meh. It kind of, as I said with Doctor Strange, falls into that origin story trap where it's very, very typical and traditional. Doesn't do too many things that are super unique. I really enjoyed the Kree and Skrull stuff, and I wish they dove into that a bit more, but we're never going to see that. The Marvel twist, as somebody who really enjoyed the Marvel stuff in the books, I would have loved to see Carol and Marvel actually team up, but I don't think we're ever going to get a real Marvel. Yeah, I never think about this movie. It's forgettable, and it's just, yeah, it's just not that good. I don't have that much else to say. It's a decent sci-fi movie, but it doesn't excel in anything too well, I guess. It's cool to see her and her powers, and her grow and be able to use her powers, but I'm looking forward to the sequel, though, because kind of like Doctor Strange, the character itself to me had more promise than the plot of the film. So I think sequels could definitely do Captain Marvel a lot more justice, just like they will do Doctor Strange more justice. And we already seen Doctor Strange get a lot more justice done for him in Infinity War. So I think that'll be really great. So then it follows up with one of the best Marvel movies that they've ever made, and it's the last one in my top five. It's Avengers Endgame. So Avengers Endgame was a almost near flawless ending to the MCU storyline of the first three phases of the Infinity Saga. It does all the characters justice. It gives us great character moments with our original characters, but also does a good job of establishing new characters and where they'll be in their parameters for the future. Gives us great goodbyes to three of our favorite characters. There's stakes, there's hope, there's optimism, there's violence, there's epic fight scenes, and time travel, and it just all melds so well. It is one of the more fluid movies Marvel's ever made, and even at 3 hours, it's the highest grossing movie of all time because people went to go see it many times. I saw it 4 times in theaters, and it's just exciting and endlessly rewatchable, very fun, and I think stakes is the biggest thing because, as I've talked about in the past with Star Wars books, I think I mentioned this in my Star Wars video. Star Wars books a lot of times feel so supplementary to the story that they never feel like they have stakes, and I feel like the MCU is that same way. A lot of times when you get these origin films or one character movies, they don't feel like the story that's going to happen in this movie is going to contribute to the overall universe. It just feels like it's going to affect this character. It might change them a little bit, but ultimately, what's going to really change that character is when you watch the Avengers movies. Well, that can be good or bad, but when you have a payoff as strong as Avengers Endgame, it ultimately turns into a bit more of a good thing for those big movies. And I think it pays off so well in this movie because it affects everyone and it affects the whole universe, and it really gives you the deaths that you expect when you have these bombastic events. Not everybody's going to make it out, and yes, I read comics, so I'm aware that pretty much everybody survives or comes back to life at some point. But it's just nice when you're watching film and you're putting this many years into something instead of a comic event where, yes, you read these books a lot and you read them every month and you spend years reading these books and these characters, and you do want to see some stakes happen. But in comics, these events, when they come out, the events last a year at most, right? So when they're over, and we got to get back to the other main storylines for each character. In film, when you have these movies that go across 11 years, you need, or 12 years when Endgame, no, 11 years when Endgame came out. Now we're at, 13 years. You need genuine stakes to keep people going and keep people thinking, yeah, there's something that could actually happen at this. Like, I don't want to keep going to these movies and going, well, that was fun, but I knew this person was never going to die. You at least need some type of stakes to these movies. And Endgame delivered and showed why we build to big event series like these. So next is Spider-Man Far From Home. And I'm going to put it in A. I think it's a little bit of a step down from Homecoming. That being said, I think it's still a great movie. I love Mysterio. I think he's a really solid villain. I like the Nick Fury, Happy Hogan, Spider-Man dynamic. I still really enjoy the European hopping through European cities and that adventure like that. Tom Holland's great as always. I love Ned and all those supplementary characters. Still a really fun movie, and Mysterio came across as a really unique villain, and I'm really glad they were able to figure out a way to use him. My major flaw with this movie, it's just one scene. It's the scene where Mysterio reveals his plan, and he's just going on and on and on about every single step of his plan. And I thought that was kind of lazy writing. I felt like it was just like, yeah, you want to see how this works? We're just going to tell you how it works all in this one scene, and we'll show you random things, and we'll talk about this person who made this and that. It's a bad scene. I really don't like that scene. I have to kind of fast forward that every time I watch it. But other than that, really enjoyed this movie. I liked seeing the locations. I'm glad they did something that wasn't in New York for Spider-Man. It was cool to see that happen. So next, we had to wait 2 years, but next we finally got another Marvel thing, and it was WandaVision. So WandaVision started out really high. I'm going to put it in B. Started out really high. I really enjoyed how different and weird it was, and I enjoyed how we were getting this mystery every week and guessing, trying to figure out what was going to happen. And I would say the first 5 episodes were really great, and then the last few, as we got closer to the ending and we started getting more and more reveals, they just kind of started being more and more flat. It just felt like, really, this is what we're getting? Like, this is exactly what I guessed it would be. There's no, like, for a show that was so weird and had so much mystery around it, for it to be, the reveals to be exactly what you were expecting it to be, was kind of disappointing. So I felt like that was a little odd. And then the finale, the last episode, turned into Marvel finale. And I think based on Falcon and Winter Soldier, which I'll talk about next, and WandaVision, Marvel hasn't figured out how to do these finales yet. Because we want to see the action. We want to see the Marvel stuff. But it would be nice if it was sprinkled throughout the whole show instead of just like the last episode is all action and you guys will have fun with that, right? And we'll never get really any true story conclusions. And yeah, there's some nice tags in WandaVision that I think really help it out. And there's some really sad moments and there's some really great character stuff, which is why it's B. But the ending is just a little flat for me. And besides that moment where, I mean, spoilers, I guess, for WandaVision, besides the moment where she brings down the illusion and, loses vision again and loses her kids. Besides that moment, which is really, really great, everything else in that finale is just kind of okay, in my opinion. And that kind of goes the same way for Falcon and Winter Soldier. I think I'm going to put this in meh. It's strong in a lot of elements. It has some decent social commentary, if not a little overt. But at the same time, so it really should just be called Falcon, because Winter Soldier has nothing to do in this show. They have the first episode really strong. It has some good stuff about Bucky trying to make amends for what he's done in the past. But and episode 4 of the show is one of my favorite episodes of all the Marvel shows they've done, even Loki. But after that, it was kind of a flat ending. Like I said, WandaVision was flat in terms of where it just devolved into Marvel stuff. This was kind of flat to where like we had this climax of John Walker killing somebody on the street, as Captain America with the shield and the symbolism of that. And I was blown away. I couldn't believe they were doing something like that violent. And then just kind of devolves into nothing. We don't really go into any of the PTSD stuff of John. I really wanted to see that. Now he's at the end, so I'm spoilers for this again. At the end, he's just talking with Bucky and just making jokes, and like it's like we're all back to normal because we want to use this guy in the future as a superhero. It was like this. We were going through the whole really interesting angle of soldiers and trauma and PTSD and how that'll affect you as you're trying to be like the American hero, right? You have to become Captain America, but you're like a real soldier, somebody who's fought in wars, who never had super soldier serum and who went through these traumatic things that the real Captain America really never had to go through because he was a Superman. He basically saved the day every time because he had the power to do so. And we got a normal guy now being him, and we get to see him kind of fall apart over the show. And then eventually, he's just fixed. That was probably my least favorite part of the show, was how they handled his conclusion and how he just shows up and everybody's like, oh, you're back. Okay. We're not upset at you anymore. And we can fight enemies and make jokes. It was just really disappointing, honestly, really disappointing way to end it. And credit to them for Falcon. He looks really good. He had a cool costume. The speech that everybody talks about. I mean, while its message is important and good, it just like, it's so overtly, this is what we want you to feel. So you should, listen to this. And it's like, well, you can spread your message out throughout the show. It doesn't all have to be in the last episode. And so, yeah, there's a lot of writing problems I have with the last episode of Falcon and Winter Soldier. But yeah, it's a decent show, not awful by any means. So I didn't put it in D, but it just is very underwhelming by the time you get to the end. But something that's shockingly not underwhelming, because I never was looking forward to this. I was like, Loki again. And it's been so weird, so fascinating, so interesting. I love the way they're doing it with time. Right now, I'm going to put it in great, because I think most of the episodes have been great so far. With a couple, episode 3 was a little like, it was more of a character episode, so it did a lot for them, but it didn't progress the plot that much. But I think it's one of those when once the show's over, you'll watch it and you'll be like, wow, that was an interesting episode. And when you're able to just binge all the way through, you won't really think about it as it's being a one episode that's kind of a different tone than the rest of the show. But getting into the finale, I think the finale could knock it up to A. If I'm being honest, it's that good. It really is that good, and it's so weird and unique. And like I said at the beginning of the show, of this video, the finale would have to be really genuinely horrible for it to drop down much lower. And I'm holding out hope and crossing my fingers, because I didn't like the WandaVision or Falcon and Winter Soldier finales. So there is that. But Loki, I think right now it's been really, really great. And Really, really hoping it nails the landing. And lastly, Black Widow. So this one just came out today slash yesterday. I went and saw it Thursday night. And what did I think about this one? Well, it's been a long time coming. We've waited 2 years for this movie, and trying to decide where to put it. And I think, unfortunately, even though it's the biggest tier, I'm gonna have to just drop it into B because there are a lot of really cool things about it. Like I said, with Winter Soldier, this has that Jason Bourne vibe. I mean, from the opening credits all the way through the film. And this is one of the only Marvel movies that has a real opening credits sequence, or at least MCU film. It's brutal. It's got a lot of hand-to-hand violence, a lot of really strong violence, no blood, so not graphic gore violence, but a lot of really like arms get broken, dislocated, broken everything. It's really relatively violent for the MCU, but that's how it should be. This is a spy thriller. This is more real world applications of the way the governments use people and create these soldiers and these killing machines, and as a more spied political thriller about Russian secret agents. I think they did a really solid job. It's not by any means close to great or excellent or top five, but as a Marvel movie that's bringing us back to the theaters for the first time in years, it is really, really nice to have that MCU logo come up on the screen, to be able to watch something as fun as Black Widow. It's a definitely an entertaining movie. David Harbour is really good. Florence Pugh is really good. I'm excited to see what they do with that cast of characters in the future. And as you know, if you've seen Endgame, it's come out 2 years ago. It's now the second highest grossing movie of all time. Eventually, it'll be back to the first. If you haven't seen Endgame, I don't know why you're watching this video, because you're probably not that into Marvel. But Black Widow dies in that movie, so when this movie's over, it is a little bittersweet, and I think they should have played up on that a little bit at the end of the film. I'm not going to spoil what happens, but they don't play up as much on that. And there were genuinely people in the theater who I heard talking about when they were going to see her next, and I was like, she's dead. She died 2 years ago. So I think they should have played up on that a little bit more and given us a little bit more of the tragic. Obviously, you don't want to go too cheesy or too goofy, but they should have really, I felt like, hammered home a little bit more that this is the last time we're going to see her, unless of course they bring her back to life, which I would not put past them or any comic book thing that has ever existed, because everybody seems to come back to life at some point. But it is still a good movie, and you should definitely go see it, because movies are back and we got to support them. And I'm glad to have a big blockbuster like Black Widow finally back in the theaters, and we finally get to see something 2 years after Spider-Man Far From Home came out. So that is it. That's this tier list. Thank you so much for watching Story Mode. This is like I said, I'm going to be experimenting with a lot of different things on this channel. I've got a lot of like more prepackaged videos that I want to make, some not just story analysis things like I did, and I also got to get back to my Star Wars how to's with how to read the comics and stuff like that, because I really wish I had those videos if I was when I was trying to get back into Star Wars canon initially in 2015. Thanks for watching. This is a lot less edited video than my last two, but I'm glad to be back making stuff for this channel, and I hope to continue to support it. And thank you for supporting me. So please subscribe, like, comment, do all that good stuff, and we'll see you next time.